Okay, Chevra, thank you so much for joining and tuning in to continue our limud b'siyata d'shmaya of Sefer Sichos HaRan. We are up to Sichon and Aleph, and we're trying to make headway piece by piece, word by word, letter by letter, as we make our way and we journey through this incredibly foundational presentation of Rebbe Nachman's wisdom and practical advice, which, like we mentioned at the outset of this piece, was given over Shavuos night, the foundation for the Torah, the receptacle within which the Torah is able to settle in a healthy way. And tonight, similarly, we're going to move just a little bit further, one more line, but we're going to get Be'ezer Hashem into the sources and other areas of Breslov teachings to try to get to the depth of this very, very important, fundamental, and really deep, even though it's all about simplicity, but it's very deep. This very, very deep concept and this very deep idea. So without further ado, and of course, we're thanking all of you for joining. And I think Rabbi Yoel gets a mazel tov, if I'm not mistaken. So mazel tov, should see much nachas, Be'ezer Hashem. Should bring a lot of light into your home. So b'siyata d'shmaya, we should only share simchas together, all of us. We should only hear besuras tovas, Be'ezer Hashem. So we're going to share our screen, and we will jump into it with Hashem's help. Okay. Sichos HaRan Nun Aleph, and this is part, it really should say E, actually. This is the fifth part in our series on Sichos HaRan Nun Aleph. And the Rebbe says like this: Gam chachmas einam klum. Chachmas, sophisticated ideas, einam klum. Again, in this realm of clarity that the Rebbe is operating from, this intense place of a zero-sum game with regard to doing Yiddishkeit optimally or not doing Yiddishkeit at all, right? From that place where it's just black and white like that, the Rebbe says, Gam chachmas einam klum. Sophistication is nothing. That's not the tachlis, that's not the focus. Like we spoke about money. It's cute, it's necessary, but that's not what it's all about. And Sichon and Aleph is a sicha devoted to what it's all about. And chachmas are not what it's all about. Rak Temimus U'Peshitus. Rak, Chazal tell us, achen beraken mu'atin. The word rak always connotes a miut, always connotes a minimization. And so the Rebbe says, rak, let's come down from chachmas, from complex, sophisticated thoughts, rak, Temimus U'Peshitus. And remind ourselves that the true goal of, like we said, what it's all about is Temimus U'Peshitus. Temimus literally means wholesomeness, wholeheartedness. We could translate it as sincerity or authenticity, being wholly there, not holy, H-O-L-Y, right? W-H-O-L-L-Y, I think it's two L's. Wholly there, to be completely and entirely present. Tamim is something that's complete, without blemish, whole. Temimus U'Peshitus. Pshitus is, of course, simplicity. That is what it's all about. And so from this place, chachmas einam klum, they are not what it's all about, and therefore nothing at all. Einam klum. Rak Temimus U'Peshitus. And that would be the opposite of klum. Klum is nothing. Rak Temimus U'Peshitus is everything. It's the hepech of it. Gam chachmas einam klum. The word gam, of course, is the opposite of the word rak. Gam means to increase. So gam, the big, fancy, impressive, sophisticated, philosophical engagement with ideas, gam, chachmas, is einam klum, is nothing, meaning to say it's completely and entirely external to the focus of what Yiddishkeit is all about. The flip side is rak Temimus U'Peshitus. Wholesomeness, wholeheartedness, sincerity, authenticity, fullness, being completely and entirely present, U'Peshitus, and simplicity. We're going to get into all of this sources in a minute, Be'ezar Hashem, that go through, not all of them, because there's so much in Kisvei Breslov on this idea. We're going to get into some of the sources. But before we do that, let's read the end of the line, which, like I mentioned to you in the past, and I'll say it again, Sichon and Aleph is one of the most important Breslov compositions in the thousands, not tens of thousands of pages in all of Likutei Halachos and Sichos HaRan and Likutei Maran and Likutei Eitzes and Likutei Tfilas and Olam L'Trufa and Yemei Shmuel and Yemei Maranat and Koich Ve'or, etc., etc., etc. All the Breslov Svarim, Sichon and Aleph is mamish, the essence of the essence of the essence of what Breslov is, the essence. And so, of course, Rabbi Nachman, in his classic style, even though sometimes it's harder to identify, but we always speak about needing to see each teaching from Rabbi Nachman in the context, the broader context of where he discusses this idea elsewhere, so that we get the sense of balance that the Rebbe intended to give over, a holistic das, not just little pieces here and there. It's the same thing with Rav Kook, by the way. It's very easy to take one line out of Shemona Kvatzim, and to run with it. But you have to see where Rav Kook spoke about the same thing in other places and in other stages and ages, etc., to get the full picture. But over here in Sichos HaRan on Aleph, because it's so essential, the Rebbe follows up every line with that balance, Minei Ubei. And so Rabbi Nachman says, again, Gam Chachma Zeinim Klum, Rak Temimus U'Peshitus. But Gam B'Temimus Asur Li Shaita. But at the same time, that Temimus U'Peshitus and the rak, the minimization that it implies, is the essence of Yiddishkeit, and the opposite of klum, which means hakol, is everything. Gam b'temimus asur li shaita. That also can be taken to an unhealthy extreme. And so with all of the simplicity, it is forbidden to be a fool. Not in the name of Breslov, not in the name of Rabbi Nachman's Temimus, which didn't mean ignorance. We're going to speak about what it means. And it didn't mean a lack of due diligence, or like we spoke in previous shiurim, a lack of ishtadlus, stam hefgerus, which Rabbi Nachman speaks about in 2 paragraphs, which we'll get to probably not next week, but the week after. Asur li shaita. Don't be a fool with your Temimus. Aval af al pikein, and he brings you back. Chachmas ein tzrichim klal. You don't need sophistication, calculations, very adult-oriented, convoluted kind of thinking. That ain't tzrichim klal. But at the same time, gam b'temimus asur li shaita. All these things can be true at once. So let's get into what Temimus is and how Reb Nosson describes Rabbi Nachman as having lived this way. That's the beautiful thing about Rabbi Nachman, is that you don't get the sense that you're being preached to by somebody who's just trying to, twist you into a pretzel, but you get the sense that someone is sharing his soul. Someone is sharing himself. Not advice that he's giving to you, but advice that he only knows because he himself utilized it to enable him to become the person that he was. That's the sense you get from Rabbi Nachman. So when the tzaddik speaks about his spodidus, for example, personal prayer, you get the sense that this is a person who's not just transmitting some lessons about personal prayer that he received from his Rebbe, it was his life. And when Rabbi Nachman speaks about suffering, this was a person who experienced suffering. And of course, the flip side, when Rabbi Nachman speaks about hope, you get the sense that this is a person who utilized those very teachings and pieces of advice to bolster his own experience of ruchnius and spiritual growth. And so let's first take a look at Reb Nosson's description of the tzaddik himself. This is it should say Shivchei HaRan, it's missing a V, Shivchei HaRan 13, Ois Yud Gimel. And Reb Nosson writes the follows. Vaya oisa kol mini avodas pshuta shel avodas Hashem b'lishim chachmas. And Rabbi Nachman himself engaged in simple avodas, simple actions, simple activities to serve Hashem b'lishim chachmas, without any big, impressive calculations. V'hakol b'hatznig gadol, and everything was very hidden. Everything was very, very private. Nobody knew. Take it as a child. When he would go outside, he would do all sorts of silly things on purpose. Foolishness, right? Foolish things. Mamish like narishkeit. He would act in a silly way, running around, jumping, doing somersaults. Until it became very, very clear to everybody else that this person is just a fool, and this person doesn't want anything with life for real. But you can't trust what you see. And Breslov is all about flipping everything and reminding us all the time not to become so arrogant that we think we know what things are when we see them at first glance. Not the world, not the Torah, not another Jew, not Hashem, not current events, not personal circumstances, not our past, present, future. Look beyond. Always look beyond. And Rebbe Nachman embodied this, because if you and I was actually thinking this today. I was driving down the street and I was in a taxi today. I was coming back from a meeting in a taxi, and I was looking out the window and I was seeing all these kinds of people walk by. It was insane traffic. I don't know, the traffic in Yerushalayim. It's crazy. You could spend half a day, mamish, just waiting to get to where you need to go. It's mamish. Wow, mamish. But I bless all of you with that traffic. I know in Lakewood they have also traffic, so better have the traffic here. But I'm looking at the taxi and I'm seeing people walking by one after another. And I was just thinking to myself, like, I know nothing about these people. I know nothing about these people. I don't know who these people are. I had a number of thoughts that were in a cluster around this idea, just seeing individuals walk by, one after another. And two of the strong feelings that I felt, on the one hand, I felt completely parived toward these people, meaning I have no reason to assume anything about them. I know nothing about these people. Just complete, and that was interesting, because usually we feel things about other people. And over here was just letting people be. Here's a person, he walked by. Here's another person, he walked by. It was an interesting thing, just reflecting on this individual, a huge universe. And then the second thought that occurred to me is that each and every one of these people in their own minds have all of these self-perceptions about themselves that no one else has, which is tragically bizarre, because each of these people is walking down the street. I saw a person walking, was holding himself in a certain way. Who knows who he is? Maybe I don't know who he is. But to me, I just don't know enough about him for that to have any impression on me. To me, he's a person. And there's more to be said about that, but that's an interesting thought as well. But then I had a third thought, mamish in this order. I had a third thought that if Rabbi Nachman of Breslov were to pass me by in the street, I'd have no idea who he was. I'd have no idea. I would hope that my neshama, like Yaakov Avinu, would jump out of the womb. Like I would hope that my neshama would pop out of my chest, you know. But maybe every person walking by us on the street is a little Rabbi Nachman. And we never know. We'd never know. And so then my power of feeling started to flip around. And I started to look at every person, mamish, as this life-changing chiddush. Because every person is a life-changing chiddush. And so Rabbi Nachman wants us to look beyond the surface. And so mamish, in his time, this was the reality. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew what this person was, what this neshama was. We're still trying to figure it out. Rabbi Nachman went on purpose and tried to conceal it. But with Chila b'me'al dusa, he says Rabbi Nachman in the beginning, In the days of his youth, he would take $1, change it into quarters. He would take the quarters, change them into dimes. Take the dimes, change them into nickels. Nickels into pennies. He would sneak into the Beis Medrash as a child. And he would take the sefer, a collection of different tefillas called Sharet Tzion. He would say the whole Hashem Yichud that a person says before doing a mitzvah, all the passion and excitement and the yichudim and the kavanas. He would take a penny, the equivalent in Russia, Ukraine, and he would put it in the tzedakah, the hidden place where nobody sees who's giving, just in the basket. He would wait a minute. He would just pretend like he was busying himself with something else. He'd walk around, look around, think about something. And then he would go back and say the L'Shem Yichud again, with all the fire and all the passion. He would take another penny and put it inside the matam b'seis, the tzedakah box. And then he would distract himself. And he would put another penny in. And this is what he would do many times until he had given all the pennies. And before each and every tiny penny, it was nothing, tiny penny, he would say it with kavana. And he would give it b'nediva slave. So in walks, this is not part of the story, but theoretically, right? Imagine, in walks this huge, huge donor who runs an exceedingly complicated business. And he's writing out gigantic checks to this one and that one. He has his name all over on different buildings and different institutions. And he walks over and he sees this little kid giving a penny and then distracting himself, coming back, giving another penny and then another penny. What's it worth? What's it worth? Shtuyot, bunch of pennies. It's nothing. But what do you mean? He's writing out gigantic checks and he's taking care of things and budgets and hearing problems and inyanim and politics and this and that. He has his name on a building. Rebbe Nachman said, Temimus U'Peshitus. Rebbe Nachman said, all I want is simplicity. Rebbe Nachman said, all HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants is a penny with kavana. And not a gigantic check that comes from gaiva, that comes from sophistication. Temimus U'Peshitus. Looks like it's nothing. But it's the opposite of klum. Because klum is chachmas. And the opposite of klum is Temimus U'Peshitus. How many of us ever thought of doing such a thing? We dream of finishing Shas, and we dream of big, big projects and big things and Kabbalah and Yichudim and Kavanas and Kabbalistic intentions. How many of us took a half hour, changed some money in the bank, shkalim, go into a shul, nobody will know. Nobody sees you. It's the middle of the day. The shul is locked. You know the code. You go in. The lights are off. You turn one little light on in the back corner and you sit with the tzedakah box. And with kavana, you give shekel after shekel after shekel after shekel. It's not very glamorous. Our society, from society, doesn't really respect such a thing. But when the question becomes, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended when he brought the Jewish soul into the world and fragmented it into men and women for thousands of years to accomplish a mission, to do something for him, what did he have in mind? And the answer that he had in mind is that he wanted to develop simple Jews. Of course, this doesn't mean that simple Jews can't write a big check or have a name on a building. Doesn't mean that. But it means that the center point of what it is that we're trying to accomplish is not the societally impressive result, but it's the means with which that end is reached. and the nature of that means, and the feeling of that means. What is it that Hashem wants from us? And the answer is our lave. Nothing fancy. The yadata hayoim, and then v'hashivoisa elavavecha, you draw it all down to the heart. Rebbe Nachman just wanted on a very simple level to do many mitzvahs. All he wanted to do is to do one mitzvah and another mitzvah and another mitzvah. He wanted, out of his passion, out of his love, out of his Temimus, which means wholeness, out of his complete presence in the act, without any ulterior motives about what other people are thinking, and about schar da'olam haba, and about what's impressive, what's going to make him feel good. None of that, just because his lave was on fire. And so he was present. This wasn't an action to go ahead and fulfill an obligation, because it wasn't an obligation. Kol nediv libo yivieha, like it says by the Mishkan. Nediv leiv. Rebbe Nachman had a heart that was on fire with ratzon, to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu's goodness into the world. And that's all he knew. And so here he goes, doing mitzvahs harbe, to express his holistic presence in authentic service and love. Rebbe Nachman later on in life would engage in simple actions, without any sophistication, nothing fancy. And this wasn't a person even of average intelligence who set that aside in favor of simplicity. This was a genius of phenomenally incredible proportions. Genius upon genius upon genius. Even as a child, everybody knew. Even as a child, to those who weren't fooled by the shenanigans, who looked beyond, a genius. When it came to his avodah, he didn't use any of that brain power, because the brain is not as important as the heart in avodas Hashem. Sometimes people advance in their Yiddishkeit to the point that they begin considering the word kavana to imply some very deep technical Kabbalistic meditation. And while it is true, of course, that in the Siddur, the Siddur of the Rashash, right, and Kavanas Ari and Ramchal and so on and so forth, they do exist, these very, very deep technical contemplations with regard to what the words mean and what the mitzvahs are and what we're doing when we're doing the mitzvahs and so on and so forth. At the very, very same time, we have to understand that kavana all the time still means what we only ever thought it meant, which is far more heart-centric than mind-centric. And the minute that those Kabbalistic intentions start to detract from the simple kavana of lave, which means I want to be doing this, and I want that my doing this should serve as a means toward the end of bonding my soul with my source, and a little bit making the window that divides between myself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu a little bit less cloudy, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light can continue to shine through into my life and through my life to the world. If it's detached from that simple kavanas halev, then all the Kabbalistic chachmas is nothing. It's nothing. Because this is not some sort of computer programming game. Yiddishkeit is all about the heart and the soul. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to express that heart and soul in avodas maisius, like we always speak about, in practical actions. Hashem wants that we should go ahead and do things And it's not enough just to sit in bed and say, oh, joyous on, because Rebbe Shalom, you know that I really want to put on tefillin. Like we always say it. That's shiur. Of course, Hashem wants that we should express that in maisim. And that's actually the way that we know that we desired to the extent that was obligated upon us because we went and did a maisa, like we always say. But at the same time, not to lose focus, to remember mamish, what it's all about. And so kavanas halev means just that. Kavanas halev. Temimus. All of me is here. All of me is here. Not some of me is here and some of me is thinking about what the guy sitting next to me is going to say, or what he's going to think, or how much schar I'm going to get. All of me is in this maisa. That's temimus, tam. That's what it means, authenticity, sincerity. He would do all the simple things that anybody can ever hear about. He would just learn a lot. What to learn, when to learn, how to learn. Limud haTorah harbe u'mitzvos ma'asiyos, and he would do as many mitzvahs as he possibly could. V'ribu tefillos ubakashos, v'ribu espoidus ma'oid. Then he would daven a lot and say lots of tehillim, and he would speak to Hashem in his own words a lot. Is there anything simpler than that? Is there anything less impressive than that? Okay, to Breslovers, that's an impressive thing. But to the rest of the world, is there anything less impressive than speaking to Hashem in your own words? People look at you like you're crazy. Like your mom is crazy. There's nothing less impressive than that. Nobody's going to pat you on the back and give you a medal or give you some sort of star. There's nothing less impressive. But these avodas pshutas that are, of course, wrapped up in Torah, avodah, gemilas chasadim, he would learn a lot. He would do lots of mitzvahs, chesed. And he would daven a lot. V'zeh haya ikar chachmasai hagdola. Listen to this. Not only was Rebbe Nachman able to set his wisdom aside and then be simple, says Rebbe Nassim, no. This was the omek of Rebbe Nachman's chachma. Because Rebbe Nachman came to a place, after all of what his intellect enabled him to attain, Rebbe Nachman reached the understanding that transcends all of the chachamim, that the greatest chachma in the world is Temimus U'Peshitus. And that's a different thing. I'll say that again. We can read this as if Rebbe Nachman was a very, very big genius, but when it came time to going ahead and giving tzedakah, he sort of set that aside. He shut off his brain, turned on his heart, and just gave tzedakah mamish b'tmimus like a little child. When he was a little child and even as an adult, and he was never that old. He left the world at 39 years old. We should all live long and happy till 120. That's not what we're saying. Instead, says Reb Nassim, his Temimus U'Peshitus was the pinnacle of his genius. Because after all of the genius, and after all of the sophisticated philosophy, Rabbi Nachman came to the deep-seated and overarching awareness that the most important thing was the lave. And his chachma enabled him to focus on that first and foremost. I'll read this line again. This was Rabbi Nachman's great genius, that he acted like a child. This was his great genius. And people on the outside looked at it and they thought it was foolish. But what they didn't understand is that this was a level of wisdom that transcended their wisdom system's ability to grasp. And so to them, it looked foolish. Not because it was sub their wisdom, but because it transcended it. And they didn't have kalim to understand the depth of the genius of Temimus U'Peshitus. Something else. Something else. Because of the incredible depth of Rebbe Nachman's intellect and wisdom, Rebbe Nachman managed at a very early, young age to this pinnacle of wisdom, which is she'ein srichim shum chachma klal b'avodas Hashem. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time with cheshbonos. I once heard a beautiful, beautiful encapsulation of what Rebbe Nachman of Breslov did for the world from Rebbe Ephraim Koenig, Shlita, who now runs the Breslov community in Svas. And he said, we sent this out with LPI, I think it was two years ago on Rebbe Nachman's yard site. We should send it out again. He said, Rebbe Nachman came to the world to tell you that you are going to live 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 years in this world. He says, why should you wait until you get into the latter part of your life to start figuring out a little bit how the world works, so that at that point you start to really live, having stumbled and made so many mistakes until that point, and then by that time you already wasted the majority of your life, and so a little bit it's verfallen already. So he says, Rebbe Nachman came to the world to whisper into our ears, let me teach you how to live meirosh, so you avoid all of that shtuyot that right now you think is going to be super important. You're going to think is super important, but you'll come around anyway, realizing that you wasted all your time. So why waste that time? Rebbe Nachman says, I'll give you the wisdom of the zakin, the kedusha. I'll give you the wisdom of a person who young in years was filled with a wisdom that transcended lifetimes of experience. Lifetimes. Age is no matter. Age is no matter. Not when you're speaking about a tzaddik like Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So Rebbe Nachman says he's the zakin de kedusha. He says, I'm going to give you good advice. Like we spoke about, Rebbe Nachman here is speaking like our grandfather. I'm just giving over what he learned along the journey. But the tzaddik says, let me give it to you early on. If we're zoich in our lives to discover Rebbe Nachman early on. And whenever we discover Rebbe Nachman, it's early on. Because the Rebbe always, it's a reset. And he starts you from fresh, from scratch. And that's exactly what the Rebbe says over here. You think right now that it's very important that your avodas Hashem becomes filled with incredible sophistication and considerations and chachmas and chumras and this and that and the other thing and shtuyot. Mamish shtuyot. Says Rebbe Nachman, why should you do that for 40, 50 years until you're in your 60s, 70s, and then look back and say, you know something? What did I do? None of that mattered. What this one thought and what that one said and what this school is and what this social status is going to be. All that really mattered was the lave in the first place. Now I ask you, what's a bigger chachma? What's a bigger chachma? The person who has all the chachmas in the world and is going to suffer that way when he discovers that it was really time wasted because it wasn't some zach, wasn't the essence of why he was sent to this world. But the person who meirosh has the clarity to be able to look us in the face and say, avoid it all. Looks simple, far deeper, far bigger chachma. Looks simple, because that's what it is. It's Temimus U'Peshitus. But it's the biggest chachma in the world, because it enables us to avoid so many pitfalls that we would fall into when we make that which is not the main thing, the main thing. Because this is the deepest chachma of all. Not to complicate your service of God with considerations that are bound to the societal nature of what this thing called Yiddishkeit is. Not to fall into that trap. Avoid it. Avoid it. The main thing is the emes. The main thing is simple avodas. They don't look important. They don't look impressive. You do you. That's the main thing. The main thing is not being the best guy in the shiur and coming up with all sorts of cheshbonos. How you're going to look in the mafteach svarim so that you can ask the best kasha and then pretend like you had the kasha. People do these things. With all these chachmas, Rebbe Nachman says, Tayr Zisa kind shtuyot. You think you're the big chacham, and here comes this fool telling you, give penny after penny into a tzedakah box in the middle of a day in a dark shul when nobody will ever know anything, and you think I'm the shaitan. Trust me. Shtuyot. Go at your own pace. Learn what sets your heart on fire. Other people don't value it. Ma ichpat lecha. What do you care? Temimus U'Peshitus. You found a derech that works for you. Hold on to it with both of your hands and proceed. You have big, sophisticated, philosophical, existential questions. Seek answers. But in the meantime, don't stop davening. Excuse me. In the meantime, don't stop Chumash Rashi. In the meantime, don't stop speaking to Hashem on the street. Don't overthink. Don't overcomplicate. Life is too short. Life is too short. And to make sure that everything is bound back with this chachma hagedola shebechol hachachmas. It's the deepest wisdom in the world. And Breslev, if nothing else, is bound up with this chiddush of Temimus U'Peshitus. Because many Chassidus had many of the things that Breslev has. Deep, deep Torah ideas, incredible eitzas and so on and so forth. Temimus U'Peshitus is something that's unique to Breslev. The focus, the way that this spirit permeates everything. This alone is the identifying characteristic of a Breslever Chassid. Temimus U'Peshitus. This is how you can tell if a person has this way, this simple way. Even in their dress, the Breslevers are wearing like these little hats, little bent sometimes. Nothing fancy. The old Breslevers used to wear streimels that were very, very thin and very close to the head, not these huge like crowns. I don't know how they walk around balancing on their heads 10 feet up, like a 10-gallon streimel. I don't understand it. The Breslevers went, Mamish, what is that? That's Chachmas, avodas Hashem. What do you mean? Streimel, Messiah. You could also wear a streimel, and it could be a small, little, humble streimel that sits a little bit on your head and accomplishes its purpose, whatever that is. Baruch Nisa V'Gashmis. Breslevers is Temimus U'Peshitus. Simple. Everything's simple. But simplicity is not simple because it's novea from the deepest amkus of life. And I hope that I'm communicating this well because it's very difficult to put into words. Let's try to allow Rebbe Nachman to do more of the talking, and maybe he'll clarify a little bit further. So let's take a look at Likutei Moharan Tanyana Mendalid 44. And the tzaddik says over here, this is an incredible rule and foundation and principle in avodas Hashem, liyos tam v'yashar. Here he adds another word, yashar, straight, which again means simple, without ulterior motives and without other considerations and calculations. Just what my neshama needs to do in this moment for Hashem. That's it. Without any cheshbonos. Liyos tam v'yashar, straight, like an arrow to the tachlis, without any stops along the way. Lavid oisay yizbarach the temimus v'lishim chachmas v'chakiris klal loy, without any kinds of chakiris, philosophical speculations, none of it. Not because we're worried. Who knows? Maybe it's going to make you into a heretic. No, because simply it's a waste of time. That's why. Because it's not why you came to this world. Why you came to this world is that Moshe Rabbeinu begins the Torah with Bereshis bar likim es hashamayim es haaretz, without any philosophical proofs. as to why I should even value this document in the first place. We have a mission in this world, and every second is of the essence. Like we always talk about using our time properly, to be machshiv our time, to value our time, to value ourselves, and to value this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu valued us enough to bring us into the world for a very, very specific purpose, to do something in this world, like we always speak about. Rebbe Nachman says, even chachmas within serving God alone, or itself rather, a person needs to distance himself. All of these kinds of calculations that a person begins to make when he starts to serve Hashem, which means to say not just Bali Tshuva, means people, we want to be Bali Tshuva. All of us want to be Bali Tshuva, halavai, right? But all of us in our trying to engage in Yiddishkeit on a deeper level, all of a sudden we're hit with all sorts of calculations because the horizons become wider, broader than they previously were, and we become aware of so much that there is to do, and so much, so much to learn, and so many mitzvahs, and so many different areas of Torah, and as halacha, and mitzvahs, and minhagim, and this and that, and so much to do. It can be completely and entirely overwhelming, and that's where we start to be machriya. We start to make our decisions oftentimes based on considerations that aren't the tachlis, of being able to serve Hashem b'simcha, of being able to set my soul free, and for it to rejoice in the service of Hashem. We become bogged down by societal considerations, institutional considerations, what the norms are, what the standard is, what the boxes are that we unfortunately need to exist within. And so Rebbe Nachman says all of these kinds of chachmas that you think is part and parcel of your avodas Hashem, of course, because it relates to what you're going to learn, and it relates to what minute you're going to keep, and it relates to how you're going to A, B, C, D. Einum chachmas klal. Those are not chachmas. Ve'im rak joyous u'shtusim u'bulbulim gedolim. They're not chachmas, they're dimyonis, they're delusions, u'shtusim, and their foolishness, folly, and tremendous confusions. And with time, you do find this, unfortunately, with time, more often than not, all of these kinds of sophistications, when we could have just put all of that aside and opened up a Tehillim and been happy with that, and say a pasuk and feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves every word that comes out of my mouth. He's kissing it, and there's no better usage of my time. And I don't need to be stressed out because I really should be doing this, and I could have been doing that, and look, and this one is doing that, and all of them are doing the other thing. But just mamish, just to do what I need to do in this moment, without any overthinking or sophistication, beating ourselves up, etc., just to serve Hashem. Temimus U'Peshitus. Quickly, with alacrity, with zrizos, and with simcha. If we're not doing that, then the chachmas oftentimes bring a person down. Dahainu, when he gives a specific example, it's like a little bit of a rhyme over here. This that a person is thinking and analyzing and being overly particular with regard to whether or not he was yotze, for example. That could be a big chachma. Person learns through the sugya of matzah. You ever see these people with the shiurim? Everything becomes a whole balagan with the measuring, and they're not sure, and maybe they have to eat another box of matzah because maybe that wasn't the shiur, and so on and so forth. And before you knew it, you destroyed your own Pesach experience. You made everybody crazy at the table, and you're busy newing this one and shushing that one, and he didn't eat the shiur, and how could it be that he's sitting by my table and he doesn't know, etc. To all these shtuyot, and you thought that was a big chachman here, but it's Hashem. Rebbe Nachman says, leave it. Do the best that you can with a whole heart, with a heart full of cheshek. Be mekayim the halacha. We're not saying do whatever you want and be happy with that. There are minimum requirements, and a maximum requirement. Be aware of what those things are. But realize, says Rebbe Nachman, it's impossible for you to do it perfectly. And Hashem never expected you to do it perfectly. Hashem wants us to genuinely try as best as we can to do things in a mahudar way. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not intend for us to drive ourselves crazy, drive our spouses crazy, and oftentimes drive our children crazy, which more often than not has the exact opposite of the intended effect of pushing them away, even though all we wanted to do was draw them close and make sure that they're doing the right thing, because isn't that our responsibility as parents? And more often than not, crazily enough, it's the parents that do that end up over pressuring their kids and making their kids resent Yiddishkeit. Whereas if they would have taken 2 steps back and lost some of the battles for the sake of the war, things could have been very different. But they were too big chachamim to do that, because they were big chachamim. And that takes a lot of temimus. That takes a lot of letting go. That takes a lot of Temimus U'Peshitus. And that's a hard thing for people to do. Understandably, it's a hard thing to do, but we have to remind ourselves that in our HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem doesn't intend to drive his creatures crazy. That's like Gemara says. Hashem doesn't come to torment us. That's not his intention. And the Torah, as Chazal tell us in Kedushin, was not given to angels. The Rebbe Nachman says something very sharp, very sharp here about these kinds of people that are engaging in an unhealthy way. And sometimes Yiddishkeit itself, by the way, could become a means for some of our most unhealthy tendencies to find expression. People have, OCD kinds of tendencies, anxiety, etc. That itself could become mamish within avodas Hashem. Those things could flourish, and it has nothing to do with avodas Hashem at all. Never did, never will. Something completely different, and it's nebuch. But teachings like this help us avoid that me'ikara, because they don't let us turn Yiddishkeit into our own mishigas. Because Yiddishkeit becomes a safe haven for people with tendencies like that, not a place for those tendencies to intensify. That only happens when Yiddishkeit is given over in an unhealthy way. But if Yiddishkeit is given over with these healthy parameters, again, Taran and Aleph was told, or Sichon and Aleph, rather, is told over when? Shavuos night. It's the vessel for the Torah. It's the healthy foundation for a Torah to flourish instead of to rot and to cause us to rot away. Like the Gemara says, Loi zachan asasam maves. These teachings help us engage with Torah in a healthy way. And so when we have these premises and we shift our perspective with regard to what Yiddishkeit is in the first place, then it becomes far less likely for our Yiddishkeit to become mamish, what Rebbe Nachman describes here as terribly a form of death. The Al-Eila, I think we've learned this in the past, actually, in this series, maybe in one of the first shiur. The Al-Eila medaktikim u'machmirim b'chumras yiseres. These kinds of people, aleihem nemar, it would do them good to remember the pasuk in Vayikra, v'chai bahem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that our Yiddishkeit should be alive, bursting with life, and all that comes along with life: vitality, vibrancy, feeling, simcha. And not to allow Yiddishkeit to become something that's more associated, chas v'shalom, with death. Because these people, says Rebbe Nachman, ki ein lahem shum chiyas klal, because they have no life from their Yiddishkeit. And what did they think Hashem gave us the Torah for in the first place? Derachecha darchi noyam, noyam. It was supposed to fill our lives with sweetness. Not compel us to run out in the street like behemoths, laying down on the floor in front of cars and beating people up. Mamish, an expression of the worst, not just Jewish tendencies, the worst animalistic human tendencies that come out in a way of sewage, mamish. There's no nicer way that I could say that. Sewage, mamish sewage. Where does that come from? Because we have a complete misconception with regard to what Yiddishkeit is and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended for the Torah to do for us. A total misconception. I don't care how old or how young these people are. A chilul Hashem to this extent, and I hope that nobody here saw any of those clips or footage from what went on yesterday, the other day. Hashem yishmar aleinu. Hashem yishmar. We're minutes to Geula, minutes to midnight. And Chaver like you and me, I hope that we're making a tikkun. But sometimes it's important to see a stark contrast. Let me tell you, Temimus U'Peshitus, there isn't. A lot of chachmas. Temimus U'Peshitus, there isn't. Ein lem shemchias klal. V'chai bahem ksiv. What did Hashem give us the Torah for? To make us neurotic people who are miserable about life and miserable about everything and looking down on people? And allowing Yiddishkeit to bring out the worst in it? Like, what was Yiddishkeit given to us for? The hepech, the opposite of that. Mamish, the opposite. The exact opposite. But people like this, says Rebbe Nachman, v'tamid, and it's a nebuch. It's a nebuch. V'tamid hein b'mara shchayra. They're always sad. They're always sad. Because they're constantly thinking to themselves, maybe according to that shita, and according to this opinion, and according to this thing, maybe I wasn't yotze. And so they never feel a sense of completion, a sense of feeling. They're not able to have any vitality from a mitzvah. So Rebbe Nachman says, don't be in what's called an oiber chacham. Don't be, there's no real good translation of that in English, overly wise. Too much. Don't overthink things. Because you think that you're a big chacham, and in the meantime, you completely and entirely subverted the point for which Yiddishkeit was given to you in the first place, with all your chachmas. With all your chachmas, you went so fast with your plane that you overshot the runway. Like, you're not where you're supposed to be. So you're left with chachmas, but those chachmas are the biggest shtus. And on the flip side, the person who stayed with Temimus U'Peshitus is the real chacham. Because that person is manifesting HaKadosh Baruch Hu's vision, which arose in his mind before creation as the premise for existence. Yisrael, Allah b'machshava tchila. Yisrael asher b'chas spa'er. Mordechai HaYehudi, we're coming up the part. Mordechai HaYehudi. Without any chachmas, just to be a yid. Mordechai's gematria, of course, Rav Chesed. That's what it is to be a yid. To be filled with goodwill. To be filled with love. To be filled with ideals. To be filled with belief that things could change and that the world can get better. And that Hashem is good. That's Mordechai HaYehudi. It's Rav Chesed. That's what Hashem wanted when he brought Yidden into the world. To be Temimus U'Peshitus. Simple. Not ignorant or foolish. But simplicity as being the crown of our intellect. A result of our intellect. Maybe you can make a deal going back to the words over here. Is that with all the tmimus that Rebbe Nachman wants us to engage with, it needs to be gam b'tmimus. Even though first he began with rak Temimus U'Peshitus, but in the context of the possibility of tmimus itself being a result of ignorance is bliss, and that's not what Rebbe Nachman is suggesting here. The tzaddik says gam b'tmimus. Our simplicity should be the result of a gam. Should be the result not of a lack of knowledge, But Adarabba, because of how much we know about Yiddishkeit, we set it aside and we become Anshe Tamim. And people who are Pashat. So Gam b'Temimus. Why? Because Asur li shaita. That's not the kind of Temimus Rebbe Nachman wanted. Shtus. No, that's not what the Rebbe wanted. The Rebbe wanted Temimus, but Gam b'Temimus. A Temimus that's above. On Purim, our ad lo yoda is not that we become so drunk that we're so entirely devoid of knowledge that ad lo yoda, or completely. No, mamish in this way, gam b'Temimus. Ad lo yoda ad. You transcend in your das on Purim till the point where, as a result of your genius, as a result of your intellect, you get to a place of lo yada. Like we learned in the very beginning of this series, tachlis hayidiyah, said Rebbe Nachman, the pinnacle of knowledge is the lo yada, is to realize that you don't know. That's the ad lo yada of Purim, not mindless stupidity. Asuli shaita, tmimus, but gam b'tmimus. Tmimus, that's the result of an addition of a great attainment of intellect with regard to what Yiddishkeit is, and not getting caught up in the sideshows. And Rebbe Nachman himself was not machmir chumras. Of course, everything was mahadrin, but extra things that he perceived to not necessarily be coming from an authentic place. Rebbe Nachman says, I don't need that. I don't need that people should say, ooh, ah. I don't need that. I need to make sure I'm keeping halacha, making sure that I'm investing my lave into it as much as I can. And that's that. Because if you hear Rebbe Nachman closes with what we mentioned, u'be'emes, after kol hachachmas, after all of the wisdom that a person could attain, like we mentioned, afilu mishi yodea chachmas be'emes, even a person who does indeed attain incredible chachma. But achar kol hachachmas, after you went ahead and attained all of this intellect and wisdom, and you learned all the Kabbalistic intentions, at that point, gam b'Temimus. Sarach lahashlich kol hachachmas, v'lavadas Hashem b'Temimus, b'Peshitus gamor, b'lishim chachmas, like a little child with a desire to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to do what he wants, and to rejoice in that, and to feel fulfilled from that. V'chai b'hem. Looks childish, looks stupid, looks very coarse when held up to the nuance, complexity of the big sophisticated adult. Says Rebbe Nachman, this is what Hashem wants. Like we learned. This is the greatest pinnacle of wisdom above all other kinds of wisdom. Live li lios chacham klal, not to be wise. So it doesn't mean to set the wisdom aside, engage with the wisdom, but that needs to bring us into a place of live li lios chacham klal, where we let go of the need to be chachamim in our avodas Hashem, and just to do the right thing in a simple way, in a private way, in a quiet way, in a way even sometimes that seems silly, in a little bit of a dance in the middle of a day on a regular Monday in March. A little bit to dance for 5 minutes. Little simple things that won't win you awards and won't get you invited to any siyum. But you know in your heart of hearts that your neshama is expressing itself authentically. Ki be'emes, says Rebbe Nachman, ein chacham ba'olam klal. With all of your wisdom and all of your intellect, there's no chachma. Because ve'ein chachma be'ein tfuna negdei yizbarach. Because the pasuk says that there's no wisdom and intellect klape Hashem. Anything, all of your cheshbainis, by Hashem, it's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. Ve'ha'ikar hu ki rachmana liba boy. Because the main thing is in Yiddishkeit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants your heart. That's the main thing. That Hashem wants our authentic presence. Hashem wants our tmimus, our wholeness. Hashem wants us, not our actions. And that's a shift when you think about that. Because I think most of us were brought up thinking Hashem wants our actions. What does Hashem want from us? He wants us to do things. And Hasidus came to the world to remind Am Yisrael that the actions that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of you is a heicha timsa for you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you. The way that you express you is in these actions that he loves, in these actions that are going to enhance your life and give you vitality and make you joyous, make you a happy person, make you a passionate, feeling person, make you a person, a breast liver, like we say, a leiv basar, a person with a heart of flesh. But it's not about the ritual. It's about HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanting a relationship with you and me. On the one hand, it's Temimus. But the truth is, this is the deepest, deepest chachma. And so Rebbe Nachman came to the world, and with this will end, Rebbe Nachman came to the world to tell us, why wait? Why waste time? Let me help you avoid it all. Don't spend years of your life living under some imagined construct of what somebody else considered important for you to be doing or not to be doing. Leave it all and follow your leiv, and follow your nefesh, and follow your neshama in a simple way, in a way that fills you with joy, in a way that you feel authentically present without any tiny negia of some ulterior motive. And that's fulfilling the injunction of the chai bahem. And chas v'shalom, that our Yiddishkeit should never become so heavy with our brains that it sags down to the floor and keels us over into an ocean, sheyamus behem. But to allow our leiv, when the leiv grows very big, it doesn't weigh you down. It lifts you up. When the brain gets too big, it weighs you down. To allow our leiv to expand and expand and expand and help us float very lightly with a lot of joy and a lot of feeling toward the infinite embrace of our Father in heaven, who again doesn't want our actions, but wants us. Shenizke. This is a very, very nuanced, delicate, and deep sugya. Very difficult to put it into words. I hope we did it somewhat justice, but I'm a little bit nervous also. This needs chazara. This needs to be worked through. But I'm telling you, don't be fooled by the simplicity of it, because it's not simple. This is not simple. This is a very, very amok, it's very, very deep Temimus U'Peshitus. It's a deep sugya. Halavai, that not just learning about it, I should be able to implement this, and mamish, we should be able to serve Hashem with chiyus, with a life, and with joy, and with a sense of satisfaction, fulfillment, and authenticity. B'siyata d'shmaya. Thank you all for joining. I apologize, my voice is not so strong today. And I hope that everybody had the most incredible Shabbos, and look forward, Be'ez Hashem, to learning with you on Thursday. B'siyata d'shmaya, with the help of the Master of the World. Thank you so much for joining. And mamish ashreinu, to a das like this. It's such a privilege. This young person, 39 years old, when he left the world, he came to the world as a zaken de kedusha, and he just gives us advice that just helps us jump over hurdles that people double our age are stuck in. Mamish stuck in. Ashreinu. We have to thank Hashem, mamish, every morning. Put it in your brachas. Thank Hashem for this access to these tzaddikim, to this tzaddik. What a privilege. Yeah, okay, Be'ezer Hashem, we'll have an amazing rest of the week, and we'll reconnect, Be'ezer Hashem, on Thursday. B'siyata d'shmaya. Thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed. Kol tov. All the best. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night.